The dust from Thomas Turner's fist hung in the air like a copper cloud before settling on Tessa's cheekbone, and she tasted blood before she felt the pain. She had learned years ago not to cry out, not to give him that satisfaction. So she simply steadied herself against the kitchen table and waited for the next blow that always came. It was 1882 in Ruby City, Idaho, a town that had seen better days when the silver mine still produced and men still had dreams worth chasing. Now, it was just a collection of sun-bleached buildings populated by bitter souls clinging to the memory of wealth that had dried up faster than the creek beds in August. Thomas grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back so she had to look at him. His breath reeked of whiskey even though it was barely past noon. "You think you can burn my dinner and I'll just accept it? You think you're worth anything at all, woman?" Tessa kept her eyes unfocused, looking through him rather than at him. It was easier that way. If she looked directly into those bloodshot eyes, she might remember the young man she had married 7 years ago when she was 18 and foolish enough to believe in love. That man had died somewhere between the mine collapse that took his leg and the bottle that had become his only companion. The thing wearing his face now was something else entirely, something that had systematically beaten every ounce of hope and joy out of her until she was nothing but a hollow shell going through the motions of living. He shoved her away with enough force that she stumbled into the counter. "Get out of my sight. Go to town and get me more whiskey, and don't come back without it, or you'll get worse than this." Tessa gathered herself slowly, retrieving her shawl from the peg by the door. Her hands shook as she tied it around her shoulders, but she forced them to stillness. Showing weakness only made it worse. She stepped out into the harsh afternoon sun, squinting against the brightness after the dimness of their small house on the outskirts of town. The walk into Ruby City took 20 minutes, and Tessa used every second of it to compose herself, to arrange her face into the blank mask she showed the world. People knew, of course. In a town this small, everyone knew everything. But knowing and helping were two different things, and nobody wanted to get between a man and his wife. That was private business, even when that business left bruises that couldn't be hidden. The general store was blessedly cool when she entered, and she nodded to Mrs. Chen behind the counter. The woman's eyes flickered over Tessa's face, taking in the fresh mark, but she said nothing. She never did. "Whiskey," Tessa said quietly, "the cheapest you have." Mrs. Chen retrieved a bottle from beneath the counter. "That will be 75 cents. Tessa counted out the coins from the small purse Thomas had thrust at her, her movements mechanical. She was reaching for the bottle when the door opened behind her, letting in a blast of hot air and the jingle of spurs. "Afternoon, Mrs. Chen," a voice said, deep and warm with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south. "I'm looking for work. Heard there might be some ranches around here hiring hands." "Most of the ranches have their full crews for the season," Mrs. Chen replied. "But the Morrison place might need someone. Old Jack Morrison's arthritis has been acting up something fierce. His spread is about 5 miles north of town." "Much obliged," the man said. Tessa kept her eyes down as she took the bottle, but she couldn't help noticing the stranger from the corner of her vision. He was tall, lean in the way of men who made their living in the saddle, with dark hair that needed cutting and a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. He moved aside to let her pass, and she caught a glimpse of his face, weathered by sun and wind but younger than she had expected. Maybe 25 or 26 at most. His eyes were the color of sage in spring, that particular shade of gray-green that reminded her of things growing. She was halfway to the door when those eyes locked on her face, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, though not of her specifically. Recognition of what he was seeing, of what those marks meant. Tessa hurried out before he could speak, before anyone could say anything that might make this moment more than it needed to be. She had become very good at making herself invisible, at sliding through life without causing ripples. The walk home seemed shorter than the walk into town, the way it always did when she was carrying whiskey. Thomas would be in a foul mood until he got it, and every minute delay increased the likelihood of another beating. She had learned to manage his moods the way a sailor learns to read the weather, always watching for the signs of an approaching storm. Thomas snatched the bottle from her the moment she entered the house, not bothering with a glass. He took 3 long swallows, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Took you long enough," he muttered, but the whiskey was already softening his edges, making him more inclined to ignore her than hurt her. Tessa retreated to the kitchen and began preparing dinner, moving quietly, efficiently. She had become very good at being invisible in her own home, at taking up as little space as possible. The burned stew from earlier still sat in the pot, and she scraped it out, wincing at the waste. Food was scarce enough without throwing it away, but there was no saving it now. She made cornbread and beans, simple fare that even Thomas couldn't complain about. He ate in silence, drinking steadily until his eyes started to glaze and his movements became sluggish. By the time darkness fell, he had passed out in his chair, snoring loudly. Tessa cleaned the kitchen, then sat at the table with her hands folded, staring at nothing. This was her life. This was all her life would ever be. She had stopped dreaming of escape years ago. Where would she go? She had no family, no money of her own, no skills beyond keeping house. The law certainly wouldn't help her. A wife was her husband's property for better or worse. Mostly worse in her case. The next morning, Thomas was in a foul mood from the whiskey, so Tessa made herself scarce, taking the washing down to the creek that ran behind their property. It was one of the few tasks that got her out of the house, and she stretched it out as long as she could, scrubbing clothes against the rocks until her knuckles were raw. She was hanging the washing on the line when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her body tensed automatically, preparing for whatever was coming, but the rider passed by without stopping. She caught a glimpse of him through the gaps in the fence, the stranger from the general store the day before, heading north toward the Morrison ranch. He didn't look her way, and she was glad of it. The days that followed fell into the usual pattern. Thomas drank, Tessa endured. Sometimes he hit her, sometimes he just screamed at her, and sometimes he ignored her completely. She had stopped trying to figure out what triggered which response. There was no logic to it, no way to predict or prevent it. She simply existed in a state of constant wariness, always braced for the next storm. On Saturday, she walked into town for supplies. Thomas had given her a list and money, and she moved through the general store methodically, gathering flour, salt, and coffee. She was examining a sack of beans when someone spoke beside her. "Those look like they might be weevily," the warm drawl said. "The ones in the barrel by the window are fresher." She turned and found herself looking up at the stranger. Up close, she could see the details she had missed before. A scar through his left eyebrow, laugh lines around his eyes despite his young age, and a gentleness in his expression that seemed at odds with the gun on his hip and the rough wear of his clothes. "Thank you," she said quietly, moving to put distance between them. "Name's Benjamin Nash," he said, not following but not leaving either. "Most folks call me Ben. I hired on at the Morrison place." She nodded, not offering her own name. The less she engaged, the easier it would be to extricate herself. "I've been meaning to speak to you," he continued, his voice low enough that Mrs. Chen couldn't hear from the counter. "If you ever need help, or just someone to talk to, the Morrison Ranch is 5 miles north of town. Anyone can tell you where it is." Tessa's hands tightened on the sack of beans. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I don't need help. I think I saw a woman with a fresh bruise on her face buying whiskey for someone who doesn't deserve her," Ben said quietly. "And I think I've seen that look before, the one that says hoping for anything better is just setting yourself up for more hurt." She turned to face him fully then, anger sparking through the numbness. "You don't know anything about me or my life." "You're right," he acknowledged. "I don't. But the offer stands anyway. No strings, no expectations. Just help if you want it." Tessa wanted to snap at him, to tell him to mind his own business, but the genuine concern in his eyes disarmed her. When was the last time anyone had looked at her with anything other than pity or indifference? She couldn't remember. "I should go," she said instead, gathering her purchases and moving to the counter. Ben didn't follow, but she could feel his gaze on her as she paid and left. The walk home felt longer than usual, weighted down with more than just the supplies in her arms. His words rattled around in her head, refusing to be dismissed. Help if you wanted it. As if it were that simple. As if wanting something was enough to make it real. Thomas was in a rage when she got back. The whiskey supply had run out and he was shaking with need for it. He backhanded her across the face hard enough to split her lip, then grabbed the supplies she had dropped and tore through them looking for a bottle. "Where is it?" he snarled. "Where's the whiskey?" "You didn't put it on the list," Tessa said, tasting blood again. "You didn't give me money for it." The look in his eyes told her she had made a mistake before his fist connected with her stomach. She doubled over, gasping, and he hit her again, this time in the ribs. She fell to the floor and he kicked her once, twice, before storming out of the house, presumably to go to the saloon in town. Tessa lay on the floor for a long time after he left, waiting for the pain to become bearable. She had learned not to move too quickly after a beating. Better to let everything settle, to assess the damage before trying to stand. Nothing felt broken, which was something. Just bruises and pain that would fade in a few days. She eventually pulled herself up and put the scattered supplies away, moving slowly, carefully. Her ribs screamed with every breath, and she suspected he had cracked one. There was nothing to be done about it except bind it tight and wait for it to heal. That night, Thomas didn't come home. It happened sometimes when he was on a bender. He would drink until he passed out somewhere and she would have a night of peace. She should have slept, but instead she sat at the window, looking out at the darkness and thinking about sage-green eyes and an offer of help. Sunday morning came with no sign of Thomas, and Tessa took advantage of his absence to tend to her injuries. She wrapped her ribs with strips of cloth torn from an old sheet, wincing at every movement. The bruises were already darkening, painting her skin in shades of purple and yellow. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping weak tea and staring at nothing when she heard a horse approaching. Her whole body tensed, preparing for Thomas's return, but the knock at the door was too polite to be him. She opened it to find Ben standing on her porch, his hat in his hands. His eyes went immediately to her face, taking in the split lip and the fresh bruises, and something hard settled in his expression. "Jack Morrison sent me," he said carefully. "He wanted to know if Mr. Turner might be interested in selling that old plow he's got rusting out back. Said he'd been meaning to ask for months but kept forgetting." It was a transparent excuse and they both knew it. Tessa glanced behind her, even though she knew Thomas wasn't there. "My husband isn't home right now." "I can see that," Ben said quietly. "His horse isn't in the stable, and there's no smoke from the chimney even though it's cold enough this morning to warn a fire." Tessa didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Ben took a step closer, his voice gentle. "When's the last time you ate something?" The question caught her off guard. She tried to remember and realized she couldn't. "Yesterday morning, maybe. I'm fine." You're not fine, Ben said, and there was something fierce in his voice now, an anger that wasn't directed at her. And before you tell me it's none of my business, you're right. It's not. But I'm making it my business anyway because I can't just stand by and watch this happen. Watch what happened, Tessa asked, even though she knew. Watch a man destroy the woman he's supposed to protect, Ben said. Watch someone die by inches when I might be able to help. My sister looked like you once, back in Texas. I was 15 and useless, too young and too scared to do anything but watch. By the time I was old enough to help her, she was dead. Her husband beat her one too many times and she just didn't get back up. The raw pain in his voice cracked something in Tessa's chest, some hard shell she had built around herself. I'm sorry about your sister. So am I, Ben said. Every damn day. Which is why I'm standing here now, probably making a fool of myself, because I can't watch it happen again. I won't. Tessa looked at this stranger who was offering her something she had stopped believing in. Hope. The very thought of it terrified her more than Thomas's fists. Hope meant there was something to lose, something that could be taken away. As long as she didn't hope, she couldn't be disappointed. He'll be back soon, she said finally. You should go. Come with me, Ben said suddenly. Right now, just grab whatever you need and come with me. Jack and Martha Morrison are good people. They'll help. And go where? Tessa asked, and she heard the bitterness in her own voice. I'm his wife. The law won't protect me from him. He can drag me back here, and then everything will be worse. Then we'll go somewhere the law can't find you, Ben said. Somewhere he can't find you. I've got money saved up. We can go to California or Oregon or anywhere you want. The offer was so absurd, so impossibly generous that Tessa almost laughed. You don't even know me. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do, Ben said simply. Because you deserve better than this. Because maybe if I help you, I can finally stop seeing my sister's face every time I close my eyes. Tessa wanted to say yes. The word was right there, balanced on the tip of her tongue, but fear held it back. Fear of Thomas, fear of the unknown, fear of hoping for something better and being crushed when it didn't work out. I can't, she whispered. I just can't. Ben's face fell, but he nodded slowly. I understand. But the offer stands. Any time, day or night. You come to the Morrison Ranch and I'll help you, I promise. He put his hat back on and turned to leave, but Tessa heard herself speaking before she could stop herself. Wait. He turned back, hope lighting his eyes. What's your sister's name? She asked. The one who died. Rachel, Ben said softly. Rachel Mary Nash. She was 23 years old and she had a laugh that could light up a whole room. She loved wildflowers and terrible poetry, and she deserved so much more than she got. I'm Tessa, she said. Tessa Turner. And I'm 25 years old, and I can't remember the last time I laughed at anything. It wasn't much, barely an olive branch, but Ben treated it like gold. His whole face transformed with his smile. It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Tessa Turner. And for what it's worth, I think you have the kind of face that was made for smiling. Despite everything, despite the pain and fear and exhaustion, Tessa felt her lips curve up just a fraction. It felt strange, like using muscles she had forgotten she had. Ben's smile grew wider. There it is. I knew it was in there somewhere. You should go, Tessa said, but there was no heat in it this time. Before Thomas comes back and finds you here. I'm going, Ben said, but I'll be back. Jack really does want that plow, so I have an excuse to check on you, and Tessa, I meant what I said. Any time you need help, you come find me. He rode away, and Tessa stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared from sight. Then she went inside and built a fire, warming the house for the first time in days. It was a small act of rebellion, wasting firewood when Thomas wasn't there to benefit from it, but it felt good nonetheless. Thomas didn't return until late that night, so drunk he could barely stand. Tessa helped him to bed, removing his boots and covering him with a blanket. He mumbled something unintelligible and passed out immediately. She sat in the kitchen until dawn, thinking about what Ben had said, about help and hope and second chances. It was dangerous to let herself think about such things, but she couldn't seem to stop. The next week passed in a blur of the usual routine. Thomas drank, raged, and occasionally hit her. Tessa cooked, cleaned, and made herself as small as possible. But something had changed. Some tiny spark had been lit that she couldn't quite extinguish. On Thursday, Ben came back. Thomas was in town, and Tessa saw him riding up the path. She met him at the door, and he tipped his hat to her. "Afternoon, Mrs. Turner. I came to talk to your husband about that plow." "He's not here," Tessa said. "Well, that's a shame," Ben said, not sounding disappointed at all. "I don't suppose you know when he'll be back." "No idea," Tessa said. They stood there for a moment, and then Ben reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Martha Morrison sent this for you. She does some baking on Thursdays and always makes too much. Said it would just go to waste otherwise." Tessa took the parcel carefully. It was warm in her hands. "That's very kind of her." "Martha's a kind woman," Ben agreed. "You'd like her. She's tough as nails but softer than butter with people she cares about." Tessa unwrapped the paper to find 3 large muffins studded with dried apples. Her stomach growled audibly, betraying how little she had eaten in the past few days. Thomas had been in a mood and had eaten most of their food himself, leaving her with scraps. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Ben asked, frowning. "I eat," Tessa said defensively. "That's not what I asked." She looked down at the muffins, then back at him. "Why do you care so much? You don't owe me anything." "Maybe I do," Ben said. "Maybe I owe Rachel, and this is how I pay that debt. Or maybe I just can't stand by and do nothing when I see someone suffering." "Does it matter?" "I suppose not," Tessa admitted. "Eat the muffins," Ben said. "All 3 of them. And if your husband asks where you got them, tell him Jack Morrison sent them as a goodwill gesture while he considers the plow deal." "He'll probably just take them from me," Tessa said without thinking, then immediately regretted the admission. Ben's jaw tightened. "Then eat them now. I'll wait." It felt strange, eating in front of someone, but Tessa was too hungry to refuse. She bit into the first muffin and almost moaned at the taste. Real butter, real sugar, dried apples that were sweet and tart at the same time. She ate all 3 muffins while Ben leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the scrubby landscape. "Martha's a good baker," Tessa said when she finished, licking crumbs from her fingers. "Best in the county," Ben agreed. "She's been teaching me, actually. I can make a decent loaf of bread now, though my biscuits still come out like rocks more often than not." The image of this tough cowboy learning to bake made Tessa smile again, that strange expression that felt less foreign each time. "There it is again," Ben said softly. "You should smile more often. It lights up your whole face." Tessa ducked her head, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. She couldn't remember the last time someone had complimented her, had seen anything in her worth remarking on. "I should go," Ben said, pushing off from the railing. "But I'll be back. Maybe next Thursday if Martha happens to bake too much again." "Maybe," Tessa echoed, and they both knew it wasn't a maybe at all. True to his word, Ben came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. Sometimes he brought food from Martha. Sometimes he just came to talk about the plow that Thomas kept refusing to sell. Thomas was usually in town during these visits, drinking away what little money they had, and Tessa found herself looking forward to Thursdays in a way she hadn't looked forward to anything in years. Ben talked about his life, about growing up in Texas and learning to ride before he could walk, about Rachel and how much he missed her, about his dreams of maybe having his own spread someday. He asked Tessa questions too, gentle inquiries about her life before Thomas, about the girl she had been before hope was beaten out of her. It was hard to remember that girl at first. She seemed like someone from another lifetime, someone who had believed in happy endings and true love. But slowly, piece by piece, Tessa began to recall her. The girl who had loved reading and dreamed of being a teacher. The girl who had thought Thomas Turner was her knight in shining armor when he courted her with wildflowers and pretty words. What happened to him? Ben asked one Thursday in late autumn. They were sitting on the porch steps, Tessa wrapped in her shawl against the chill. What turned him into this? The mine collapse, Tessa said. 3 years ago. He was trapped for 2 days before they dug him out. His leg was crushed and they couldn't save it. The doctor cut it off below the knee and Thomas just fell apart. He started drinking to numb the pain, and he never stopped. The man I married died in that mine. This person wearing his face is someone else entirely. That doesn't excuse what he does to you, Ben said firmly. No, Tessa agreed. It doesn't, but I loved him once and I made vows, for better or worse. Worse shouldn't mean this, Ben said, gesturing to the fading bruises on her arm where Thomas had grabbed her the week before. Worse shouldn't mean being afraid in your own home. Worse shouldn't mean being slowly destroyed by the person who's supposed to love you. What else can I do? Tessa asked, and she heard the exhaustion in her own voice. I have nowhere to go, no way to support myself. At least here I have a roof over my head and food when Thomas doesn't eat at all. You could leave, Ben said, not for the first time. I meant what I said, I'll help you. And go where? Tessa asked. How would I live? What would I do? Martha needs help at the ranch, Ben said. She's been saying for months that the place is too much for her to handle alone now that Jack's arthritis is so bad. She could use someone to help with the cooking and cleaning, tending the chickens, that sort of thing. It wouldn't pay much, but it would be enough for room and board and a little extra. Tessa stared at him. You asked her about this, about me. I mentioned that I knew someone who might be looking for work, Ben said carefully. I didn't tell her your circumstances, just that you were capable and needed a fresh start. She said if you're willing to work hard, she's willing to give you a chance. It was tempting, dangerously so. The idea of leaving Thomas, of having a job and independence, of not living in constant fear. But the fear itself held her back, the knowledge of what Thomas would do if he found her. He would come after me, Tessa said. He'd drag me back here and it would be worse than before. Not if we made sure he couldn't find you, Ben said. The Morrison Ranch is 5 miles away. You could use your maiden name, start fresh. Thomas barely leaves town these days except to come home. If you're careful, if you don't come into Ruby City, he might never know you're so close. And if he does find out, Tessa asked. Then I'll deal with him, Ben said, and there was steel in his voice. I won't let him hurt you again, Tessa. I promise you that. She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to believe that escape was possible, that there was a life waiting for her beyond these walls. But 7 years of having hope beaten out of her made it hard to trust in anything good. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take all the time you need, Ben said. But Tessa, don't wait too long. One of these times he's going to go too far. He's going to hit you just wrong and you won't get back up. I've seen it happen. I don't want to see it happen to you. After he left, Tessa sat on the porch until the cold drove her inside. She thought about what he had said about the offer of work and safety and a new life. It seemed impossible, too good to be true, but the seed had been planted. That night, Thomas came home drunk and mean. He raged about dinner being late, even though it wasn't, and threw his plate against the wall. Tessa cleaned up the mess silently, and when he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave fingerprint bruises, she didn't cry out. But later, lying in bed next to his snoring form, she made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, or she would die here, slowly and painfully, her spirit crushed long before her body gave out. The next Thursday she was waiting on the porch when Ben rode up. He took one look at her face and dismounted quickly. "What happened?" he asked, taking in the fresh bruises. "I'll take the job," Tessa said. "If Martha still wants me, I'll work at the Morrison Ranch." Ben's face transformed with relief and joy. "She wants you. When can you leave?" "Now," Tessa said. "Thomas is in town. He won't be back until late tonight. If I'm going to do this, it has to be now before I lose my courage." "You need to pack anything?" Ben asked. Tessa looked back at the house that had been her prison for 7 years. "Just a few clothes. Everything else here belongs to Thomas or is tainted with bad memories." "I don't want any of it." She went inside and quickly gathered her few belongings, the worn dresses and undergarments that were truly hers. It all fit into a small carpet bag that had been her mother's. As she left the house for the last time, she took one final look around, saying goodbye to the girl who had walked through that door 7 years ago believing in happy endings. Ben helped her up onto his horse, and she settled in front of him, her bag clutched in her lap. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she felt safer than she had in years, surrounded by his warmth and strength. The ride to the Morrison Ranch took an hour, and Tessa spent every minute of it fighting the urge to look back, to second-guess her decision. But Ben's steady presence behind her kept her grounded, kept her moving forward. The Morrison Ranch was larger than she had expected, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The house itself was a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. It looked warm and welcoming, like the kind of place where people were happy. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her late 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a bun and a weathered face that spoke of years of hard work and laughter. Her eyes were sharp but kind as she took in Tessa's bruised face and thin frame. "This must be Tessa," Martha Morrison said, her voice warm. "Ben's told me a bit about you. Welcome to our home, dear." Tessa slid down from the horse and her legs almost buckled. Martha caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising strength. "Ben, take care of the horse," Martha said. "I'll get Tessa settled. She looks like she could use a good meal and a soft bed." "Yes, madam," Ben said, tipping his hat to Tessa with a smile that promised everything would be all right. Martha led Tessa into the house, and the warmth enveloped her like a hug. The interior was cozy and lived in, with quilts draped over furniture and the smell of something delicious cooking on the stove. It was everything Tessa's house with Thomas had never been. "Now then," Martha said, settling Tessa at the kitchen table. "First things first. You look half-starved, and those bruises need tending. Then we'll talk about the work arrangement and get you set up in your room." She bustled around the kitchen, ladling stew into a bowl and cutting thick slices of bread. She set the food in front of Tessa along with a cup of hot tea sweetened with honey. "Eat up, dear. You're safe here." Those 3 words broke something in Tessa. Safe. She was safe. The tears came before she could stop them, years of pain and fear and exhaustion pouring out in great heaving sobs. Martha simply pulled her chair closer and put an arm around Tessa's shoulders, letting her cry it out without judgment or platitudes. When the tears finally subsided, Tessa felt hollowed out but lighter somehow, as if crying had released some of the poison that had been building up inside her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Nothing to be sorry for," Martha said firmly. "You cry as much as you need to. Lord knows you've earned the right. Now eat. You'll feel better with some food in you." The stew was the best thing Tessa had tasted in years, rich and hearty with tender chunks of beef and vegetables. She ate every drop and 2 slices of bread, and Martha refilled her bowl without being asked. After dinner, Martha showed her to a small room on the second floor. It was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but it had a window that looked out over the valley, and the bed had clean white sheets and a thick quilt. "This is yours for as long as you want it," Martha said. "The work is simple enough. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, tending the chickens and the garden. Nothing you haven't done before, I expect. In exchange, you get room and board and $15 a month." "Sound fair?" "More than fair," Tessa said. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. You don't know what this means to me." "Call me Martha," the older woman said. "And I think I have some idea. Ben's told me enough. You don't have to worry about your husband finding you here. We'll keep you safe." That night, Tessa slept in a real bed for the first time in what felt like forever. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the day, and woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of roosters crowing. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Martha already in the kitchen. "Morning, dear. Sleep well." "Better than I have in years," Tessa admitted. "Good," Martha said. "Now let's get you started. The chickens need feeding, and after that we'll make breakfast for the men. Ben and Jack will be in from checking the fence line soon, hungry as bears." Tessa fell into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in years, she felt useful rather than burdensome. Martha was patient and kind, teaching her the quirks of the ranch routine, and Jack Morrison turned out to be a gentle giant of a man with a booming laugh and eyes that crinkled at the corners. Ben was a constant presence, always nearby but never intrusive. He checked on her regularly, asking how she was settling in, if she needed anything, if she was happy. The concern in his eyes was genuine, and Tessa found herself looking forward to their conversations. Days turned into weeks, and Tessa began to relax, to believe that maybe she really had escaped. Thomas hadn't come looking for her, hadn't even sent word. Perhaps he was glad to be rid of her, free to drink himself to death without anyone nagging him about it. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the valley in white. Tessa had never been fond of winter with Thomas, when the cold made him surlier and being trapped inside together was its own special torment. But winter at the Morrison Ranch was different. The house stayed warm, the meals were plentiful, and there was laughter around the dinner table every night. She found herself healing, not just physically but emotionally. The bruises faded and she put on weight, her face filling out and color returning to her cheeks. Martha taught her to bake, and she discovered she had a talent for it. Ben pronounced her biscuits the best he had ever tasted, and the pride she felt at his words was a revelation. One evening in December, she was sitting by the fire, mending one of Jack's shirts, when Ben settled into the chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. "You look different," Ben said eventually. "Happy." Tessa looked up from her mending. "I feel different, lighter somehow. Like I've been carrying a weight for so long I forgot it was there and now it's gone." "I'm glad," Ben said softly. "You deserve to be happy, Tessa." She set down the shirt and met his eyes. "I never thanked you properly, for everything you've done, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for giving me hope when I thought I had none left." "You don't need to thank me," Ben said. "I just did what anyone should have done." "But you're the only one who did," Tessa pointed out. "Everyone else in Ruby City knew what was happening and they all just turned a blind eye. You didn't. You cared enough to help, and that makes all the difference." Ben reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I care about you, Tessa. More than I probably should, given how recently you left your husband, but I can't seem to help myself." You're brave and strong and so much more than you give yourself credit for." Tessa's breath caught. She had been so focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she hadn't let herself think about feelings or attraction or the future. But now, with Ben's hand in hers and his eyes warm on her face, she couldn't deny what had been growing between them. "I care about you too," she admitted. "You gave me back something I thought was lost forever. You gave me hope, one small day at a time." Ben's smile was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. "I'd like to keep doing that if you'll let me. I'd like to court you properly when you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. Just the chance to spend time with you and see where this goes." "I'd like that," Tessa said, and she realized she meant it. She wanted to explore these feelings to see if they could grow into something real and lasting. She wanted to know what it was like to be loved gently, kindly, by a man who saw her as a person rather than property. They took it slowly, mindful of Tessa's need to heal and adjust to her new life. Ben courted her with old-fashioned chivalry, bringing her wildflowers even in the dead of winter, reading to her by the fire, teaching her to ride so she could see more of the ranch. Tessa bloomed under his attention like a flower that had been too long in the shade. She laughed more, smiled more, allowed herself to hope and dream again. She discovered that she loved the ranch, loved the work and the animals and the wide open spaces. She loved Martha and Jack, who treated her like family. And slowly, carefully, she let herself fall in love with Ben. It wasn't the wild, reckless love she had felt for Thomas all those years ago. This was something deeper, more solid. It was built on mutual respect and genuine care, on shared values and quiet moments of connection. Ben made her feel safe and valued and beautiful, and she tried to give him the same in return. Spring came, melting the snow and bringing green back to the valley. Tessa had been at the ranch for 6 months, and she couldn't remember ever being happier. The nightmares about Thomas had faded, and she was beginning to believe she might actually have a future worth living. One warm afternoon in April, she was in the garden planting vegetables when she heard horses approaching. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and her blood ran cold. Thomas sat astride a borrowed horse, his face twisted with rage. He had found her. "So this is where you've been hiding," he spat, dismounting clumsily because of his wooden leg. "Living in sin with some cowboy while I've been searching for you." Tessa stood slowly, her heart pounding. "How did you find me?" "Someone in town saw you riding past with that Nash fellow," Thomas said, stalking toward her. "Took me a while to put it together, but here you are, playing house at the Morrison Ranch. You're my wife, Tessa. You belong to me and you're coming home." "No," Tessa said, and the word came out stronger than she expected. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Thomas. That life is over." His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You don't get to decide that. You're my property and the law says you belong to me." Before Tessa could respond, Ben appeared from the barn, moving faster than she had ever seen him move. He grabbed Thomas's wrist and twisted, forcing him to release Tessa. "Get your hands off her," Ben said, his voice deadly quiet. Thomas stumbled back, then lunged forward with a wild punch. Ben dodged easily and shoved him away. "I don't want to fight you, Turner, but I will if I have to. Tessa isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go." "She's my wife," Thomas snarled. "You have no right to keep her from me." "She's a human being with the right to choose her own life," Ben countered. "And she's chosen not to be with you anymore. Accept it and move on." Jack Morrison emerged from the house then, a rifle cradled in his arms. He didn't point it at Thomas, but the threat was clear. "I think you should leave now, Turner. You're not welcome here." Thomas looked between them, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," he said, pointing at Tessa. You're still my wife, and I will get you back, one way or another." He mounted his horse and rode away, and Tessa felt her knees go weak. Ben caught her before she could fall, pulling her close. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe. I won't let him hurt you." But Tessa knew it wasn't over. Thomas had found her, and he wouldn't give up. The law was on his side, after all. As long as they were married, he had the right to claim her, to drag her back to Ruby City and his house of horrors. That night, Martha, Jack, Ben, and Tessa sat around the kitchen table discussing options. None of them were good. "I could leave," Tessa said quietly. "Go somewhere far away where he can't find me." "Running won't solve the problem," Jack said. "He'll just keep looking. Men like Turner don't give up." "Then what do I do?" Tessa asked, and she heard the despair creeping back into her voice. Ben reached across the table and took her hand. "There is one option. It's not ideal, and it's moving faster than I wanted, but it would solve the problem permanently." Tessa looked at him, confused. "Marry me," Ben said. "If we're married, you're legally my wife, not his. He'd have no claim on you anymore." The room fell silent. Tessa stared at him, trying to process what he had just said. "That's not a bad idea," Jack said slowly. "Turner couldn't argue with a legal marriage." "But it's fraud," Tessa said. "I'm still legally married to Thomas." "Not if we can prove he abandoned you," Martha said, her eyes sharp with thought. "He hasn't supported you financially in months. He drove you away with his abuse. A judge might be willing to grant you a divorce on those grounds, especially if we have witnesses to testify about the abuse." "Judge Crawford is a fair man," Jack added, "and he's got no love for men who beat their wives. His own daughter left a bad marriage a few years back, and he helped her get free of it." "Even if we could get a divorce, it would take time," Ben said. "In the meantime, Tessa's vulnerable. But if we announce our intention to marry, if we make it clear to everyone that she's under my protection now, it might be enough to keep Turner at bay until the legal issues are sorted." Tessa looked at him, this man who had given her back her hope piece by piece, who had shown her what kindness and respect looked like. "Ben, you can't seriously be suggesting we get married just to protect me from Thomas. That's not fair to you. Who says it's just to protect you?" Ben asked softly. "Tessa, I love you. I've been in love with you for months now. I was planning to ask you anyway, just not quite so soon. But if moving up the timeline keeps you safe, then I'm all for it." "You love me," Tessa whispered. "Of course I do," Ben said. "How could I not? You're strong and brave and beautiful, and every day with you is better than the last. I want to marry you, Tessa. I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch or wherever you want to go. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you and have babies with you and show you every single day that love isn't supposed to hurt." Tears streamed down Tessa's face, but they were good tears this time, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. "I love you too," she said. "I think I've loved you since the first day you offered to help me, even though I was too scared to admit it. Yes, Ben. Yes, I'll marry you." Ben stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her softly. It was Tessa's first real kiss, the first one that held nothing but tenderness and love. Thomas had taken many things from her, but he had never truly kissed her, never shown her affection without expectation or cruelty behind it. When they broke apart, Martha was crying too, and even Jack's eyes looked suspiciously bright. "Well then," Martha said, dabbing at her eyes with her apron, "we've got a wedding to plan, and first thing tomorrow, we're riding into town to see Judge Crawford about that divorce." The next morning, all four of them rode into Ruby City. Tessa wore her best dress and held her head high, refusing to cower or hide. She was done being afraid. Judge Crawford's office was in a building near the courthouse, and they found him reviewing papers at his desk. He was a stern-looking man with white hair and piercing blue eyes, but his expression softened when Martha explained why they were there. He listened to Tessa's story without interruption, his face growing grimmer as she detailed years of abuse. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Turner," he said finally, "I won't lie to you. Divorces are difficult to obtain, especially for women. The law heavily favors husbands, even abusive ones. However, in cases of extreme cruelty and abandonment, I have some discretion. If you can provide witnesses to corroborate your claims, I'm willing to grant you a divorce on the grounds of abandonment and cruelty." "I can testify," Martha said immediately. "I've seen the bruises, heard her story, and half the town has seen Thomas Turner stumbling drunk through the streets. Everyone knows what kind of man he is. Mrs. Chen at the general store can testify too," Ben added. "She sold Tessa the whiskey Thomas sent her for. She's seen the bruises." Judge Crawford nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll schedule a hearing for 2 weeks from now. In the meantime, Mrs. Turner, I advise you to stay away from your husband. If he approaches you or threatens you in any way, you come directly to me. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Tessa said. "Thank you." They left the judge's office feeling cautiously optimistic. 2 weeks wasn't long to wait, and if the divorce was granted, Tessa would finally be free. But Thomas wasn't willing to wait 2 weeks. 3 days later, he showed up at the Morrison Ranch again, this time with 2 rough-looking men Tessa didn't recognize. They were clearly hired muscle, meant to intimidate. Ben met them at the gate, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Jack stood on the porch with his rifle, and even Martha came out, a shotgun in her hands. "This is private property, Turner," Ben said calmly. "You're not welcome here." "I'm here for my wife," Thomas said, "and I'm not leaving without her." "Tessa's filed for divorce," Ben said. "Judge Crawford is reviewing the case. Until then, she's staying here under our protection." "Divorce?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "On what grounds? Because she's decided she'd rather play house with you. That's not how it works, Cowboy. She's my wife, and she's coming with me." He urged his horse forward, but Ben stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "No, she's not." One of Thomas's hired men reached for his gun, but the distinctive sound of Jack cocking his rifle stopped him cold. "I'd think real careful before you do anything stupid," Jack called from the porch. "This is my land, and I'm within my rights to defend it and everyone on it. You draw that gun, and I will shoot you. Self-defense, plain and simple." The standoff lasted for several tense seconds, and then Thomas spat on the ground. "Fine, but this isn't over. I'll see you in court, Tessa. And when the judge sides with me, because he will, you're coming home. And I'll make sure you regret every single day you spent away from me." He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his hired men following. Tessa, who had been watching from the window, came outside on shaking legs. "He's not going to give up," she said. "Neither are we," Ben said firmly, pulling her close. "We'll see this through, Tessa. I promise." The 2 weeks until the hearing crawled by. Tessa jumped at every sound, convinced Thomas would return with more men, more threats. But he stayed away, presumably preparing his own case for the judge. The day of the hearing arrived, and they rode into town together. The courthouse was packed, word having spread about the case. Domestic disputes were always good for gossip, especially when they involved people everyone knew. Judge Crawford called the hearing to order and listened as Tessa presented her case. Martha testified about the condition Tessa had been in when she arrived at the ranch. Mrs. Chen testified about the whiskey and the bruises. Even the town doctor, who had treated Tessa once for a broken wrist, testified about her injuries. Thomas's defense was that Tessa was a disobedient wife who had abandoned him in his time of need. He painted himself as the victim, a crippled man whose ungrateful wife had run off with another man. He was convincing in his self-pity, and Tessa's heart sank as she watched the judge's impassive face. Finally, Judge Crawford called for a recess to consider the evidence. They waited for an hour in agonizing suspense, and when the judge returned, his expression was unreadable. "I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented," Judge Crawford said, "and I've come to a decision. The pattern of abuse and cruelty detailed by Mrs. Turner and corroborated by multiple witnesses is both disturbing and credible. Mr. Turner's claim that his wife abandoned him is undermined by the fact that he drove her away through his own actions. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting Mrs. Turner a divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty and abandonment. This marriage is hereby dissolved." Tessa couldn't breathe. She was free. Actually, legally free. Thomas erupted from his seat, shouting obscenities, but the bailiff quickly escorted him from the courtroom. Judge Crawford banged his gavel for order. "Mrs. Turner is free to remarry at her discretion," he continued. "Mr. Turner is ordered to stay away from her and to make no further contact. If he violates this order, he will be held in contempt of court. This hearing is adjourned." Tessa burst into tears, and Ben wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she sobbed with relief. Martha and Jack embraced them both, and for the first time in 7 years, Tessa felt truly, completely free. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Martha had sewn Tessa a new dress in soft blue calico, and Ben wore his Sunday best. Judge Crawford performed the ceremony, and Jack and Martha stood as witnesses. It was nothing like Tessa's first wedding, which had been a large affair with half the town in attendance. This was intimate and meaningful, a celebration of love and new beginnings. When Ben kissed her as his wife, Tessa felt like she was flying. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and warm and full of promise. They spent their wedding night in Ben's room, which was now their room, and Ben was patient and gentle, erasing the bad memories of Thomas and replacing them with tenderness. He worshipped her body like it was something precious, and for the first time in her life, Tessa understood what it meant to make love rather than simply endure it. Life settled into a new rhythm. Tessa was Mrs. Nash now, a married woman with a husband who cherished her and a home where she was valued. She and Ben worked the ranch alongside Martha and Jack, and there was talk of eventually taking over when the older couple retired. Thomas had left Ruby City shortly after the divorce, unable to face the gossip and judgment. Rumor had it he had headed to California, still chasing dreams of easy wealth. Tessa hoped he found whatever he was looking for, but mostly she just hoped she never saw him again. As summer turned to fall, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She told Ben one evening after dinner, and his face lit up with joy. He kissed her soundly, then dropped to his knees and kissed her still flat belly. "We're having a baby," he said wonderingly. "A real family. Are you happy?" Tessa asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Ben said. "You've given me so much, Tessa. You've made me believe in second chances and new beginnings. You've shown me that love can heal almost anything. I can't wait to raise this baby with you." Their son was born the following spring, a healthy boy with Ben's green eyes and Tessa's dark hair. They named him Daniel James Nash, and he was perfect in every way. Ben was a devoted father, getting up for midnight feedings and changing diapers without complaint. He sang lullabies in his deep voice and rocked the baby for hours when he was fussy, watching him with their son. Tessa felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. This was her family, her real family, built on love and respect and genuine partnership. She had thought hope was lost forever, beaten out of her by years of abuse, but Ben had given it back, one small gesture at a time. He had shown her that she was worthy of love, that she deserved happiness, that her life could be more than mere survival. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Catherine Rose Nash, who had her mother's smile and her father's stubborn streak. The ranch prospered under their care, and when Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, they inherited it along with Martha, who lived with them until her own death 5 years later. Tessa and Ben raised 4 children total, 2 boys and 2 girls, in a house filled with laughter and love. They taught their children the value of hard work and the importance of treating people with kindness. They told them stories about their courtship, though they softened the harder parts, saving the full truth for when the children were old enough to understand. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ben took Tessa back to the spot where they had first really talked, the porch of the old house she had shared with Thomas. The house had fallen into disrepair, abandoned and forgotten. "You ever regret it?" Ben asked, holding her hand. "Leaving him? Choosing this life?" Tessa looked at her husband, at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my hope, Ben. You gave me back my life. How could I ever regret that? I'm the lucky one," Ben said softly. "I get to spend every day with the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known. I get to love you and be loved by you. That's not luck, that's a miracle." They stood there for a long time, watching the sun set over the valley they called home. 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. As the years passed, Tessa never forgot where she had come from or what she had survived. The scars, both physical and emotional, never completely faded, but they were reminders of her strength, proof that she had endured and overcome. She used her story to help other women in similar situations, offering them work at the ranch or connecting them with resources to escape their own abusive marriages. She became known throughout the county as someone who would help, no questions asked. Ben supported her completely in this work, understanding that her past had shaped her into someone who couldn't stand by and watch others suffer. Together, they created a sanctuary where hurting women could heal and rebuild their lives, just as Tessa had done. Their children grew up understanding that their home was special, that their mother had survived something terrible and had chosen to use that experience to help others. They learned compassion and courage from her example, and they carried those lessons into their own lives. Daniel, their eldest, became a lawyer who specialized in helping women obtain divorces from abusive husbands. Catherine became a teacher, fulfilling the dream her mother had once had. Their other 2 children, Samuel and Grace, stayed on the ranch, expanding it and continuing their parents' legacy of providing refuge for those who needed it. As Tessa grew older, her hair turning silver and her face weathering like the landscape she loved, she often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. From the broken, hopeless woman she had been to the strong, content grandmother she had become. The transformation had been long and painful, but it had been worth every tear, every moment of fear, every hard one step forward. She was sitting on the porch one autumn evening, watching the grandchildren play in the yard when Ben settled into the chair beside her. His hair was white now and his movements slower, but his eyes still held that same warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "Everything," Tessa said. "How far we've come. How different my life is from what I thought it would be. How grateful I am for every day I've had with you." "I'm the grateful one," Ben said, squeezing her hand. "You gave me purpose, Tessa. After Rachel died, I was just drifting, trying to outrun the guilt and the grief. Then I met you, and suddenly I had a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. You saved me as much as I saved you. We saved each other, Tessa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. That's what love does. It doesn't fix everything, but it gives you the strength to fix yourself. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Their eldest grandson, named Benjamin after his grandfather, was teaching his younger sister to skip stones in the creek. Their laughter carried on the evening breeze, a sound of pure joy. "Do you remember the first time you smiled at me?" Ben asked. "Really smiled, not just that polite thing you did when you were trying to be invisible." "I remember," Tessa said. "It was the third time you came to the house and you brought those muffins from Martha. You said something silly about your biscuits turning out like rocks, and I couldn't help but smile. It felt so strange, like I had forgotten how my face was supposed to move. I thought my heart was going to burst right out of my chest," Ben said. "That smile lit up your whole face, and I could see the real you underneath all the hurt and fear. I knew right then that I was going to fall in love with you." "I think I was already a little bit in love with you," Tessa admitted. "I just couldn't let myself acknowledge it yet. I was too afraid of what hoping might cost me." "And now?" Ben asked. "Now I know that hope is worth the risk," Tessa said. "Every single time. Because even if things had gone differently, even if we hadn't ended up here, trying was better than giving up. You taught me that, Ben. You taught me that I was worth fighting for." Ben lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are worth fighting for, worth fighting with, worth spending a lifetime loving. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." As darkness fell and the children were called inside for supper, Tessa and Ben remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. They had lived a good life together, full of hard work and simple joys, challenges overcome and victories celebrated. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of Tessa's old life, something that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch that had been her refuge had become her home, and the cowboy who had offered her hope had become her partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had created a legacy of love and resilience, showing their children and grandchildren that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a path forward if you were brave enough to take it. Years later, when Tessa was 83 years old and Ben was 85, they celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch house was full to bursting with family, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled every room. Catherine gave a toast, her voice thick with emotion. "To my parents, who showed us all what real love looks like. Who taught us that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up. Who built this family on a foundation of kindness and respect and unwavering commitment to each other. We are who we are because of your example." Everyone raised their glasses, and Tessa felt tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She had never imagined in those dark days with Thomas that she would live to see this. A house full of love, children who were happy and whole, a husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon. "Thank you," she whispered to Ben, who was holding her hand as he always did. "For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For loving me when I didn't think I was worth loving." "Thank you for letting me," Ben said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "For taking a chance on a drifter cowboy with a guilty conscience and a heart full of hope. For building this life with me. I love you, Tessa Nash. I have loved you for 53 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left and beyond." They kissed, and their family cheered, the great-grandchildren giggling at the sight of their ancient grandparents being so openly affectionate. It was a perfect moment, the culmination of decades of small moments, small choices, small acts of love that had built something extraordinary. Ben passed away peacefully 2 years later, in his sleep with Tessa beside him. He simply didn't wake up one morning, his heart finally giving out after 87 years of faithful service. Tessa grieved deeply, but she didn't break. He had given her too much strength for that. She lived another 4 years, surrounded by the family they had built together, telling stories about the cowboy who had saved her and the life they had shared. On her last day, she gathered her children around her bed and told them the full story of how she and Ben had met, holding nothing back. She wanted them to know the truth, to understand what their father had done for her, what they had built together. "Your father gave me back my hope," she said, her voice weak but clear. "He did it one small day at a time with patience and kindness and unfailing love. He showed me that I deserved better, and then he spent the rest of his life proving it. That's what I want you to remember. That's his legacy and mine. That no matter how dark things get, there is always hope, always a chance for something better. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it." She passed away that night, quietly slipping away in her sleep just as Ben had. Her children buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Tessa Nash, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She was brave." The ranch continued under the care of their descendants, still offering refuge to those who needed it. The story of Tessa and Ben became family legend, passed down through generations as an example of what love could do, how it could heal and transform and redeem. Young couples in the family spoke their wedding vows under the old oak tree, where Tessa and Ben had been married, wanting to start their own journeys in the same place that such a remarkable love story had begun. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the valley, some swore they could hear laughter carried on the breeze. Two voices joined in joy, eternally young and eternally in love. It was probably just the wind playing tricks, but it was a nice thought anyway. A reminder that love, real love, never truly dies. It lives on in the hearts and lives of those it touched, a lasting legacy that transcends time and death. The story of the woman whose hope had been beaten out of her, and the cowboy who gave it back one small day at a time, became more than just a family story. It became a beacon of light for anyone who had lost their way, proof that there was always a path forward if you were brave enough to take it, and that sometimes, in the darkest moments, hope arrives on horseback in the form of a kind-hearted stranger with sage green eyes and a determination to make a difference. Their love story wasn't perfect or easy, but it was real and lasting and beautiful in its honesty. It proved that people could heal from even the deepest wounds, that second chances were possible, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the courage to leave behind what was killing you and reach for what could save you. Tessa had found that courage with Ben's help, and together they had built something that would endure long after they were both gone, a testament to the power of love, hope, and one person's decision to care when everyone else looked away.